you do during the day. If you work, what you work as. If you don't work, what you spend most of your day doing, and the best thing you've watched on TV recently, so that I can get some suggestions. So I'll start off with you going around the corner of my screen, Jack.
Hi, yeah, I live in Hastings. I'm self-employed. I work in IT. And what was the other question? What we've enjoyed watching lately?
Best thing you've watched on TV recently?
I just started watching True Detective. It's very good.
Where's it on?
I think it's on. We watched it on Amazon Prime, but I think you can watch it on Sky or something as well.
Very good. Well, thanks for joining, Jack, and you're very welcome. Rose?
I live in Hastings. Used to be a primary school teacher. I'm now retired. The best thing I've watched on TV recently was The Covenant, and it's about an interpreter who gets rescued from Afghanistan.
Oh, very good. What was it?
My son recommended it. It's really good. It's on Prime.
Prime. Very good. Well, I will put that on the list. Thanks for joining, Rose. Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda. I live in Hastings. I'm retired. I was an accommodation officer for the University of Brighton. I haven't watched that much television. And I watch staff things like antique roadshows and stuff like that.
Do you like it?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Is Fiona Bruce doing that now?
Sorry?
Is Fiona Bruce doing it?
Yeah.
What do you think of her? Is she doing a good job, or?
Yeah, I was interested in her question time because it was nearby. It was in Bexhill. And that was quite interesting because obviously being on the coast, we're quite interested in the refugee situation.
Yeah, we might come back to that a bit later. But thanks for joining, Linda. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt. I live in the Hitchin Highbury area. I'm a team coordinator in the mental health industry, and probably the cricket was the most exciting I watched yesterday.
Were you disappointed?
Disappointed, but I enjoyed it. So it was a good game, but sad to see them lose, but can't win them all, can you?
Indeed. Thanks for joining, Matt. Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle. I am a pre-sales consultant for a HR and payroll software company called MHR, and I live in Harpenden West, which is in sort of North London area. And the most exciting thing that I've recently watched is Night Agent on.
Oh, it's great.
I watched it on Netflix. I'm not sure if it's on any other sources, but yeah, it's really good.
Did you watch it like over time, or did you just like binge it in one?
I binged watched it.
Yeah.
It's quite addictive to be watching like on separate days, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was traveling recently and I like downloaded all the episodes and basically watched it in like 2 days. And like, my brothers and sisters like, how can you do that? Like, how can you not just enjoy it over time? And I'm like, no, I just have to watch it all at once.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, John and Michelle. Richard?
I'm based in Hastings. I work as a technical author. And probably the best thing I watched on television recently was the coverage of the Isle of Man TT races.
Oh, very good. I'm actually from Northern Ireland, so we've got big motorbike racing heritage there. If you've ever been to any of the road races around there, that's up in my part of the country. So it is
fantastic. Yeah, no, I've only been to Southern Ireland. I haven't been to Northern Ireland yet, but it's on my list.
Some of the best motorbike racing you'll get there. Thanks for joining, Richard. And someone here called Samantha.
It's Chris. This is my wife. Sorry,
Chris. Let me change you to Chris. Chris, you're very welcome. I think you maybe missed the start. So it's name, where you live, what you do during the day, and the best thing you watched on TV.
Yeah. So Chris, I'm an auditor, live in Hitchin, and best thing, I don't really watch much TV, but yes, I've started binge watching Modern Family, which I know I'm late to the party, but it is funny and it's easy watching.
Great. Well, you're very welcome, Chris, and thanks everybody for introducing yourselves. So I'm going to start off with a fairly general question. When I say the word regulation, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
what they're trying to do about being able to protest.
Okay, tell me more about that, Rose.
Oh, well, I've just heard a bit about it on the news. They're changing it so that it won't be so easy to protest against things that we, want to protest about.
What do you think about that?
Full thing, so I don't know that much about it, but I've heard that they're changing it.
And what do you think? So if they were kind of trying to restrict or limit protesting, what would your reaction to that be?
Well, I've got mixed feelings about it. I think a lot of it's based on the Extinction Rebellion protesters, because they've actually closed motorways and things like that. And I think that's why they've brought it in. But in principle, I think we should be able to protest. But, maybe there are certain cases where you have to intervene. I don't know. It's, in principle, I think you should be able to.
Mm-hmm. And anyone else on regulation? What's the first thing? So we've got protests and some of the restrictions that maybe we put on that. Anything else when you hear the word regulation?
Yeah, personally for me, it's a word I see and read hundreds of times a day. Due to the nature of my work, I have to do a lot of reading of British standards and government guidance. So as soon as I see regulation, that just means work.
Yeah. Just means work. Okay, that's great. Anyone else, when you hear or see the word regulation, what do you think?
The same thing as that one, really. Sorry. That was
Sorry,
CQC. They regulate all health and social care.
CQC. Right. Michelle, you were going to pop in there.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say that it's quite a personal thing. Like some of the most common examples, someone mentioned about the motorways and laws against employment regulations and things like that. I think it's quite a personal subject in terms of what you would be thinking as a personal preference in terms of, I don't know, food or drugs or, testing on animals, things like that. So I think it's quite a personal preference in terms of those regulations and what examples they can be used for.
Mm-hmm. And is that kind of there are some regulations that you're comfortable with, some that you're not comfortable with, or
yeah. That's personal to me anyway. Yes.
Yeah. And can you give me some of those examples if you're willing to, like, what are some of the rules that you think, well, actually, I'm really glad that's there, or maybe I'm not glad that's there, or
yeah, I think another really common one at the moment is the minimum wage laws. I think that's quite important that all organisations kind of stick to that. So obviously you've got your salary that you give, or minimum salary, and I think certain companies try to get away with not offering the minimum wage as the month as you work it out, the per hour. So I think a lot of companies are trying to get kind of bypass that at the moment, and I don't think it's right. So that's one that's quite firm to me actually at the moment. Just with all the cost of living and everything, that's probably why that topic is quite,
Has anyone else heard of that minimum wage?
Yes.
Tell me what you think about that, or what you've heard, and if it's different to what Michelle's heard, or more in that direction. Linda, go ahead.
I think we do need regulation, and I have a grandson who's doing an apprenticeship, and obviously the minimum wage for that can be quite low, and obviously I'm quite interested on his behalf to be seen. I think he was getting something like £4 an hour, and that seemed very low. So obviously I was concerned, but like the protesters, I have mixed feelings, because I do believe we all have a right. We can't become like China and all these different. But in the same token, if I had a hospital appointment and there was somebody glued to the motorway or going on a hard-earned holiday, I would resent that. So it's that mixed feeling, really, because people do have a right to protest. But if it stopped you getting to an urgent hospital appointment, or going on a well-earned holiday, or having to get to a sick person, it could be, the damage done that day was dreadful, or over those few days.
Yeah. I'm just going to pick up on the point that both Michelle and Linda made there on minimum wage. I'm going to show you a headline that was in the paper, or not in the paper, but rather on BBC News today. And it says, WH Smith, M&S and Argos failed to pay the minimum wage. More than 200 firms face penalties and must repay workers after breaches hit 63,000 people. What do you think of that headline? Does that surprise you?
Shocked, completely shocked. I would never think a company like Marks and Spencer's or WH Smith's, I thought they would be looking after their staff very well. And I always thought that Marks and Spencer's was a good employer. So very surprised.
Others, Jack, can I bring you in on this? What is your reaction?
Yeah, I'd just echo that. I mean, you just think with such a massive employer, you think there would just be more stringent checks and they just would be by the book in terms of following national guidelines on minimum wage. But yeah, it's quite shocking that they clearly, I don't know how they've got away with it or what kind of loopholes they're jumping through to kind of pay people below minimum wage. But it just, yes, it beggars belief, really.
Anyone else? Chris, can take you in on this. What are your reactions to that?
Oh yeah, I heard that story on my way into work today, and I was surprised the companies named were, what they were. They're big names, household names that you wouldn't ever think that they would believe themselves that they could get away with that because they're such household names that it would be reported straight away if they were doing it. So yeah, I was really surprised about the companies involved in that.
Yep. I'm going to share a fact that I read today when I was reading about this, and one of the explanations given about the reason why these companies were allowed to do this was that at the minute a company can be expected to be inspected for minimum wage compliance once every 500 years. So they have the enforcement agency, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs in this case, but generally enforcement agencies don't have very much money. They can't really enforce the rules because they don't have the manpower or womanpower to go around the country and check the kind of returns of each of these companies. What do you think should be done about that? Should more money be given to these enforcement? What was your reaction to that figure of 500 years?
Well, ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Go back to medieval times or something, the last check or something.
Medieval times.
1980. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, outrageous.
Outrageous. Rose, what were you going to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous and unbelievable. I mean, if the big names think they can get away with it, you wonder how many smaller companies are also getting away with it because nobody's checking it.
Yeah.
You know, it's appalling.
I mean, I wonder if the news today will encourage people who think they're on below the minimum wage to come forward. But if you are frightened of losing your job, perhaps you won't. I don't know.
Matt, do you want to come in there?
Hey, sorry, you say?
Do you want to come? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it just seems like from the industry that I work in, it seems crazy that it's not picked up on because CQC checks so much stuff in health and social care that companies the size of Marks and Spencer's can get away with it. Really, it should be something that should be like regulated and checked.
Yeah.
I don't know if retail has the same sort of thing as CQC, but that sort of setting should be set up as well, maybe to protect people.
Mm-hmm. And surely HMRC is obviously involved in this at some point down the line or the process. I'm quite surprised that doesn't flag up. So they match, the number of hours from the salary or per hour. So I'm quite surprised that there's no in between checks that can potentially be happening with HMRC, to be honest.
Yeah. Are there any other kind of, so we've talked about the minimum wage there. Are there any other kind of areas that you think about whenever it comes to rules and regulations in the UK today?
Sorry, go on.
Now, there's one area I'm going to show you another headline here that was in the news again today, and it says, let me just load one moment. Okay, there we go. RSPCA push revival of dropped animal welfare bill, and so Labour plan to force the kept animals bill dropped by the government back into Parliament. Has anyone heard about this?
No.
Oh,
No.
no, not
No.
So the government had a plan earlier in the year. They were going through Parliament, but had a bill or a piece of legislation that was going through the motions in the House of Commons and the Lords, which wanted to crack down on dog thefts and ban the live export of farm animals. Those were kind of animal welfare challenges that we have in the UK today, and then they dropped it recently, and Labour are trying to bring that back in. What do you think about that? The government dropping that bill on dog thefts or on animal welfare more generally?
Well, in a way, it seems to me typical of a lot of the feelings of the government in power at the moment, that they don't really care about a lot of things, people, animals. I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think the government today lack a lot of direction. They don't really seem to have a clear path or understanding of where they want to go. So things are getting ushered through quickly. Like I think that protesting law was sort of swept under the rug almost, or put out to detract off the Partygate stuff. And then, yes, dropping stuff like this, it just seems they don't really know where they want to go or what rules they're doing. They're sort of, going in whatever direction that somebody is in the attention. So they're not really following through on much.
Yeah. Anyone else on the animal welfare stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point that Chris made, though. I think he's quite right.
I'm going to broaden out a wee bit. So we've been talking about rules, we talked minimum wage and these things, and there's kind of a tension in some of this that some people might say that some rules and regulations are either protections that keep people and the people and places we love and us safe. That's one argument. And the other argument is that actually rules and regulations are burdens. They make life more difficult. What one are you more likely to kind of to think? Is it more the protections or burden when you think about rules and regulations?
I suppose because I'm getting older, I like the protections. That I think rules are there for a reason, and we need to adhere to them. But I resent that things take so long, and like you're saying with the RSPCA, pointing out that something gets dropped very quietly, and you have well, a bit like Boris and all this rubbish we've listened to for the last couple of weeks. I just find that I question what our time and money is getting spent on in government. Unfortunately.
I want to pick up on something, Chris, I think you said, or potentially it was Rose, both of you, this idea that the government isn't caring or doesn't care about things anymore. Are there any specific kind of rules or regulations or things that haven't been done, any things the government haven't responded that show you that they don't really care, or as you see it, they don't care? Any instances? Richard, hold on, Linda, sorry, I'll just bring in Richard here first and then I'll go around. Richard, that kind of the government not caring, is that something that resonates with you?
I would probably put it a little bit differently and say, rather than it's the government not caring, I think the government has been kind of ruling via headline, because it's been in free fall for quite a lot of this term. We've had unelected leaders, we've had the shortest term Prime Minister ever. So I wouldn't necessarily say things are being dropped specifically. I'd say more they really don't know what they're doing because it's like a revolving door in there. That would be my take on it.
Anyone else on that kind of idea that the government don't really care anymore? Is that something that who to show a show of hands? Who's that idea? Like, you agree with that? So Linda, you've got your hand up. Matt, Richard, Chris, Jack. Not Michelle. Michelle, we'll come to you then in a minute. But Rose, that idea that the government don't care. What are the kind of examples that you have that show you that?
You can look back from the COVID day when we were all like had to stay in and follow these rules, and then they have the party, isn't it? And they're filmed and enjoying themselves when we were all sort of doing what we're told to do. You could almost say it started back then, publicly, that we sort of found out that it comes across as they care about us so much as maybe what they can get out of us and how they can benefit themselves. Like the RSPCA thing, it's done very quietly because it's not. Most people love dogs and quite sympathetic, aren't they? And if there's bad press about that, they've sort of hushed it under the carpet, hoping no one sort of sees about it, sort of impression as well. So that's how I feel about not trusting them, but they're not telling us everything that they want us to know. And
Anyone else on that kind of general idea of the government not caring?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think they definitely don't care. And going back to the COVID situation, they're having that party gate, and we were told that we can't leave the house, we can't visit family or go outside of our territory, or miles out of, where we live. They just simply don't care. They care about power. They can care about control and money, and that's just it. I don't think they care about the people.
Yeah.
And in terms of money and things like that, all when the petrol, for example, was sky high and rocketed through the roof, and certain people couldn't get to work, nurses couldn't get to work because it's so expensive with the cost of living. And then you find out that BP has made the most amount of profit in the last sort of 12 months. And I don't know how much control that they've had over that, but that's just an example that I'm personally giving.
Yeah. I'm going to move on a site that's been super interesting and really very helpful. I'm just going to move on very slightly, and let me share my screen here. So here are 5 things that the government might be able to do, or any government, whether it's this government or the next government after the next general election. 5 priorities when it comes to rules and regulations that they could have. So one of them is better enforcement of the current rules. So we have the rules, but it's making sure we enforce them. Another one is reducing the burden of rules and regulations, or reducing the number of rules and regulations that we have. Another is having tougher penalties on those who break the rules, whether they are businesses or individuals. Another one is just generally having stronger rules, regulations, and standards, stronger, better rules. And then the final one is rules protect vulnerable groups first and foremost. So the number one thing that you think about is rules protecting the most vulnerable. If you were the Prime Minister, if you were the Minister in charge of rules and regulations, what would be the priority for you? And I'm going to go around the room here. So I'll start off with you, Matt. What would be your priority?
I suppose tougher penalties for businesses, individuals who break the rules.
Yeah.
I suppose it would just, like for Mark Spencer's, it would make them think, well, if we're going to get fined a small amount for us, it doesn't really matter because we save so much money. But it's kind of like the whole Man City thing with the football, isn't it? They're being fined for breaking the fair play, but they've got so much money that doesn't really matter to them.
Yeah.
So tougher penalties, I suppose, would help that really.
And if they keep breaking the rules and keep kind of pricing that money in, like what should the government do in that case, Matt?
It's kind of like us with driving, isn't it? If you get caught speeding, you can do like a speed awareness course, can't you? But if you keep getting caught, you get more penalties and you get more fines. You can end up in prison in theory, couldn't you, sort of thing? So whereas these companies just probably get fined a small percentage of their profit that doesn't really They need to find a way of making them not want to do it, so it affects the business rather than taking out of their expenses, I suppose.
Yeah. And so that kind of same principle you would apply to businesses. This keep getting caught speeding, they're tougher penalties.
Yeah, it's like with CQC. If you get like an inspection and it's poor, you have to turn it around within a certain amount of time. Otherwise, your business can be shut down, sort of thing. So you have to stick to this standard, and if you don't, you can lose the business. So
yeah, that's great. Linda, what would be your priority if you were the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I agree. I think tougher penalties for business or individuals who break the rules. I think, perhaps in some things we're too soft. And I agree that there are some companies it's easier to pay a fine because to implement something would cost them millions. And if they know they're just going to get fined 500,000 every few years, what's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm trying hard. I recently was told of an instance of that, and I can't think of it at the moment. But yeah, I was quite shocked that it would be much easier just to ignore something because the penalty for a big company wasn't that serious.
Yeah. Rose, what would be your what would be your priority?
My initial priority was rules protecting vulnerable groups. But I'm kind of, with what people have said, I'm quite, the tougher penalties for businesses is, I'm not sure which one I would prioritise at the moment. But initially it was for vulnerable groups.
Okay, great. Michelle?
I'd probably agree with the tougher penalties for businesses and exactly what the other two said. Exactly the same. You've got a big company like Marks and Spencer's who's got lots of profit behind them, lots of money, and so for them being caught that they're not paying national minimum wage is not really going to put them out of pocket. And so for me, that would be quite close to me, to be honest.
Yeah. Richard?
I think I'd agree with the tougher penalties stance because certainly living near the coast, with the amount of sewage that goes untreated into the sea when we have no choice other than to pay water rates, and also in all our rivers, then if the penalties were tough enough, it would be cheaper for them to get the work done properly. But as the penalties are so weak, it's actually more cost effective for them to get fined and pay the fines. So yes, I would agree with tougher penalties.
Sorry, that was the company that I was recently told about, that the water companies, the fines are so low, the profits they make, they would rather be fined.
Exactly. It's cheaper to be fined.
Yes, and I mean, for me, I want to swim in the sea every day. And for the last few days, I haven't been able to.
Yeah, because we had a sewage spillage a couple of days ago, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I was quite shocked to learn that most of the water companies aren't English, they're foreign.
No, and to be honest with you, an awful lot of our infrastructure is foreign. I mean, the company EDF, that stands for Electricity Department Francais.
Yes.
Our distribution network is UK Power Networks, which is owned by China.
Gosh.
So, I think Veolia is French. An awful lot of the large companies that do a lot of work in our country aren't from our country, or certainly aren't owned by our country.
Yeah. Quite frightening.
And just conscious, we had Chris and Jack. Did you have anything different from what was the other priorities, or then we'll come back to sewage. I want to spend a bit of time talking about sewage.
I was torn between the tougher penalties and the stronger rules, or stronger/better rules. Because if it was better rules, I think there'd be more compliance and they would work a bit more for everyone, not just a certain few people, and the rest will have to, not have to, but could break it because they know it's not going to impact them much.
Yep.
So
I'd pretty much echo that. I think a lot of them work in tandem with each other, really. So if you had stronger rules that were better enforced, that would by definition help more vulnerable people. I think I'd echo a lot of what everyone said about kind of the ability to, clamp down on these companies, not having any sort of kind of responsibilities for what they're doing, especially like the sewage thing is just ridiculous. So I think they all kind of work to kind of similar ends, a lot of those three.
I want to spend a bit of time talking about sewage. So you raised an interesting point there, Richard and Linda, about the foreign ownership of water companies. Is that the kind of thing that you would like to see banned in the UK? Do you think that we'd have fewer problems when it comes to sewage if they were British-owned companies? Or
well, I remember growing up and not having problems with sewage in the seas, and I remember them being privatised and sold off in the probably mid-80s, I would say. And I know that previously they didn't have to turn a profit in the same way that a company with shareholders does. So realistically, you can never put the same amount of money back into a business if you're paying shareholders as well. So my preference would be that certain, particularly infrastructure, should be government owned and not privately owned.
Do others agree with that? Disagree? Where the other?
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree.
I go on holiday to other countries and I go in the sea. It's crystal clear, and to see what the state of the water on the local news after we've had heavy rain is quite frightening in this day and age. That
how they can be paying their CEOs and shareholders these huge bonuses when they're just pumping this crap into the ocean for a year and then not reinvesting any of their profits into actually upgrading the infrastructure. It's just
And we're all encouraged and want to eat more fish and stuff, but what are the fish? If they get examined, what they're absorbing all this crap, and we're eating the fish.
Yeah. I'm going to move on a little bit to some other kind of environmental issues. Are there any other environmental issues? So we've got sewage as one of these ones affecting water, food, or swimming in the sea.
For us locally, and I'm sure the rest of the country, is the state of the roads. Again, you go to France, Germany, Spain, and the roads are fantastic. We just have potholes, and it is an absolute nightmare. And they have companies in that just cover over the top, and 2 months later, they're back to a terrible condition. I just feel we have to do jobs properly, and we're not doing it. It's like putting a sticking plaster over everything. We seem to be so good at doing that at the moment in England.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I completely agree. My son came over from Spain recently to stay with me, and he could not believe what the roads were like here.
Yeah.
So we've had potholes in the road just outside where I live, and they did fill some of them in, but obviously some of them weren't the right depth or width of hole, so they left them. So it's just a hodgepodge.
So we've got roads, we've got sewage. Thinking about the environment or nature or the countryside, is there anything else that comes to mind of the kind of challenges that are in your area, or things you'd like to see when it comes to the environment?
Rivers. Water quality in the local rivers. I know we've spoken about sewage, but that was in the sea. We've also got poor water quality in the local rivers for poor sewage treatment.
And sewage, yeah.
Just on a more like going back to the Extinction Rebellion thing, not that it's not a local problem, but I guess in terms of like an environmental, longer term humanitarian thing, I guess I empathize with people, like having annoyance when they like say, oh, well, it's impacting my life. I couldn't get to my hospital appointment, or I couldn't get to this. I guess I do have some empathy with the kind of cause of the Extinction Rebellion, because if you think about longer term effects of global warming and things like that, old people, for instance, there's been like 20% rise in old people dying over the last 2 decades because of the heat in certain countries, in our country. So in the longer term kind of things, you do have some more empathy for Extinction Rebellion, because you kind of see their point. It's like, well, you won't have you're worrying about your hospital appointment now, but your grandchildren might not live into, because they're dying of, the heat when they're in their old age and things like that. So it kind of puts it into perspective a little bit for me. So I do have some sort of empathy for what they're doing, even if it's annoying.
I just want to ask one more question on the environment, and then we will move on. So in both Hitchin, Harpenden, and Hastings, the 3 Hitches, there are a series of nature reserves. So we've got Batford Springs in Harpenden. Has anyone heard of Batford Springs? No. Anyone heard of Deacon Hill in Hitchin? Yeah, Chris, you have. And then in Hastings, there's the very famous cliff beaches. I imagine everyone in Hastings has seen the cliff beaches. So these are what the government call sites of special scientific interest. So they're nature reserves. They're important because of the unique nature and biodiversity and everything that is there. Do you think we're doing enough to protect areas like that, or what should we be doing to protect them?
I think for us locally, if you're talking of the cliffs, it's eroding. You just go to Beachy Head, and they're having, I don't know how many meters are falling into the sea. So perhaps something they need to be spending more money to be able to build some sort of protective wall in the sea, and they're not doing that. But I mean, that's just one small part of the country.
Anyone else on any of those, maybe in the Hitchin and Harpenden people that we have here today? Anything do you think nature is well protected there or not?
Yeah, I mean, well, we've got a lot of green area around us. We've got the nature reserves. I feel like there's only a risk of, in terms of the ones that aren't nature reserves, the green areas that are just the natural green areas which can be built upon, because you see it all over the news, like the amount of houses and stuff going on. What we need is far more that we're building. So all this green land is always going to be at risk. And I think if it's at least a nature reserve that's protected, they can't build on that.
Yep.
So it's good and it's important that more areas get designated as nature reserves, but I don't know how often that occurs or how you even go about saying this is a nature reserve. It's an area of scientific interest.
Yeah. And what do you think? That's an interesting point there, Chris, about, do we need more houses or do we need to protect nature more? If it was up to you and you had to, I mean, it's obviously not the only choice that's available, but if it was up to you between building more houses or protecting or kind of preserving the countryside, what do you think is a bigger priority if you were in the government?
I think at the moment for me, it's preserving the countryside. We need the fields for the farmers because they need to be growing stuff, making homegrown produce, because we know how food's getting expensive and we're having to import food, which sometimes doesn't grow because they have hot summers now. So we need to be able to grow our own crops and we need the fields to do that. So I think at the moment it's, focus on maintaining those nature reserves and the fields and the greenery.
I think.
One second, sorry, Rose. So let's put nature reserves to aside because they're very specific, special places, and just the countryside more generally. Do you think we should be allowed to build in the countryside, or would you rather protect the countryside, just the general countryside, not kind of very specific nature reserves? Rose, what would you?
Well, I don't see why we can't do a lot of both, because what we could do for housing is develop a lot more of the brownfield sites, the deserted areas within towns. There's a lot of places that could be developed without actually impacting on the countryside. Yeah. And remediation might well need to be done and everything, but at least you wouldn't be encroaching on the countryside so much, because we desperately need more houses, especially social housing.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on a minute. We might come back to some other issues about the workplace, but I want to show you some videos here for a minute and get your feedback on it. So let me see if the tech works this time, if my computer's playing ball. I'm just going to show you this first, and then we're going to talk about it afterwards. So let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm going to play this now, and then we'll have a chat about it. What do you think of that video?
I think that, well, basically, we shouldn't have left the EU. Brexit shouldn't exist. The amount of rules and regulations, I don't think he should get rid of all those rules and regulations, because a lot of them we benefited from. Just for example, when you wanted to use your phone anywhere in Europe, if you wanted to work anywhere in Europe, there's a lot of good things. I mean, every country has rules that are maybe better than other rules, but I think we were better off where we were.
Yeah. What do others think about that? Rishi promising to rip up the rule book, if you like.
Well, it's all very well promising, but you can't. It's not as easy as that. And we were told that the country would save so many millions and millions by coming out of Brexit. And sadly, I think now, if there was a vote, if you knew what you knew now, would you have left Brexit? No. And when I talk to most people that voted to come out, they say, we wish we hadn't done it.
Mm.
And I think we were carried away on a dream that didn't happen, really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel that. I think we're the poor brother now in Europe, sadly.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's coming up to the anniversary of 7 years from the vote on Friday, but leaving the rights and wrongs of Brexit aside and focusing a bit more on what Rishi Sunak was promising to do there. So this was during the leadership election last year, and he promised to rip up the rules and regulations for the EU. Do people think that's good idea, bad idea? Why? So we've had Rose and Linda. Anyone else who wants to chip in on whether that, just as a general priority for the government, is that something it's a good idea, bad idea? What do you think?
I think in a lot of ways it's a bad idea, because the EU is our closest marketplace. So if we're not following their rules and regulations, we won't be able to trade with them, we won't be able to sell them a number of products, commodities and services. So we kind of have, whether we like their rules or not, we're going to have to comply with their rules, otherwise we can't use them as a marketplace.
Yeah. And going to anyone else on that, on the rights or wrongs of Rishi ripping up the rule book? No. Okay. I'm going to show you another video. So actually, what happened? Rishi didn't get elected, as you will all remember. The first time round, we had the Truss premiership. He then came back in office, and 100 days into his time in office, he wasn't able to get rid of all 2,400 rules and regulations. And recently he confirmed that by the end of this year, he also won't be able to get rid of the 2,400 regulations. And I'm going to show you a video of a government minister who explained why. And I want to get your reactions to what she is saying. Oh, I got the wrong, let me see, sorry, that's the wrong video. 1 second. Let me see the tech works this time. Yep. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll play this and then we can have a chat.
My view is that what we want to do is get rid of laws that we don't need, and there's a process for that. It is not the bonfire of regulations. We are not arsonists. I'm certainly not an arsonist. I'm a conservative. I don't think a bonfire of regulations is what we wanted. What we wanted was reform and removal of things that we did not need. And this change in process, which I think is still a technical change, is what is going to deliver that. And it's already creating a lot of the impetus, a lot of the momentum, which in terms of showing people what has happened so far. Until I did this, no one knew what was happening. No one knew what was being revoked or reformed. And we could end up in a situation where we're telling ourselves that there's a big bonfire of regulations, and no one would have known what would happen until after the sunset, and then people saw that some things were still there, which we thought we'd repealed. And I was not going to let that happen on my watch.
What are anyone's reactions to that video?
I actually found it quite hard to understand what she was saying.
I was just about to say the same.
Sorry, that was so. Basically, I can explain what she was saying. It might have been a sound issue on my end. Basically, the government promised, or Rishi Sunak promised when he was running to be the Prime Minister, that he'd rip up the rule book. And she said when she came on board a bit later that she wasn't prepared to rip up the rule book because she called herself a conservative, not an arsonist. And she said it was important to know what the rules meant and how they were going to be applied, and if we remove them, what the effect of that would be. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that argument? What was your kind of impression of her argument? Chris, bring you in.
I was going to say, I think it went back to what I was saying before, is they don't seem to know what they want or what they're doing. Mm-hmm. You know, Richie seemed to go, yeah, this is what people want, so let's burn these rules, let's make some new ones, this will get me in. And then actually, if you sat down and thought about it, you can't ever get rid of 2,400 rules and there'd be no impact on the country for that.
So a lot of these kind of election promises, campaign promises, a lot of them are just taglines, you know, kind of sensationalist kind of like points for people to kind of latch onto, but actually in practicality have, you know, this is completely impossible. Every the country might grind to a halt if they were, you know, they don't have the legislation or, you know, to put their own laws into place that would kind of just, you know, take over. It's just ridiculous.
I agree with what's been said so far, but I would also say that it's worthwhile remembering that the country didn't vote Rishi in. The Conservative Party voted him in, so those policies would have been chosen for them rather than us.
Yeah. Jack, I want to come back to you. What was your impression of what? So the minister's name was Kemi Badenoch. What was your impression of you know what she was saying there? Her kind of argument after, like.
I think it was a bit of a put down, really. I mean, it was just a complete renege on what, you know, they set out to do. So it was just kind of publicly acknowledging that in practicality, it was just completely a bit of a pipe dream and probably a sensationalist campaign promise just to say that they were going to tear up everything on the same vein as what the Brexit was promised, all these kind of red tape cutting and all this money and all this, you know, all these things that we could do with our independence. But in actuality, it just, that's all it was. It's just something to provoke people's imagination, really. But it doesn't actually, in the real world, it didn't really amount to anything. That's what I think. And I think she was saying that, you know, just we can't actually do it. It doesn't. It's not possible. So she was just rewording it and saying, well, no, we can't do that. You know, I'm not an arsonist. It's saying she was just backtracking as fast as she could, really.
Okay. Anyone else have anything to add on that video?
No.
No. I think if they had been able to remove all of these rules and regulations, who do you think would have been the people to benefit from them, from the removal of these rules and regulations?
The Conservative Party.
Anyone else?
I reckon probably the rich 10% of the UK, the highest earners.
Yeah.
I would say large businesses that work in this country would have a lot of money to make on the removal of rules, and they're probably quite large donors to political parties as well.
Yeah. What about ordinary people?
I don't think they benefit.
No, I agree.
No. Okay. I'm going to move on to the other main candidate for Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Who knows Keir Starmer? Can you put your hand up if you know Keir Starmer, if you know who he is?
I know who he is.
Know who he is, okay. So Michelle, you don't know who Keir Starmer is? No. Jack, do you know who Keir Starmer is?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So Keir Starmer, Keir Starmer is the leader of the opposition. He is the leader of the Labour Party.
Labour Party.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Great, we're all on the same page. What do you think of Keir Starmer? Anyone feel free to jump in on this.
I think he's a huge disappointment. In these days of internet, TV, and everything, you've got to have some charisma, if you know what I mean. You can't be a dull person. He might be very good at what he could do. I don't know, because I feel he doesn't come across well.
Okay.
So he's a disappointment.
Yeah. Anyone else think similar, different?
I know you're asking about Keir Starmer, but for me, I end up switching the television when his deputy comes on, this woman, because she just is so negative about the Tory party. And I think, will you get in and be able to do it any differently? And she really puts me off. I can't cope with her attitude. And what she says is, she just is so against them, but she doesn't talk with how they could do it different. And I end up trying to listen, and after a few minutes, I have to walk away from her. So sadly.
Okay. And that's Angela Rayner you're talking about?
Yeah. I find a bit like the other lady was saying about Keir Starmer. For me, I find her so negative.
Okay. I'm just going to move on, just some of the rest. Anyone else have anything you'd like to say about Keir Starmer? Chris, what do you think of Keir Starmer?
I was going to say I'm unconvinced by him. I don't get the impression, he's going to do anything different, is strong enough to do anything different, really.
Yeah.
I'm not against him, I'm just unconvinced.
Yeah. Matt?
We're the same. Just feel he's, in a way, he's similar to everybody else that's been a Prime Minister of the Conservatives, but he's in the Labour sort of team, really.
Okay.
He comes from that. I mean, isn't he a sir as well? Comes from that sort of privileged background as well, isn't he? So.
Yep. I want to ask you a question. So we've been talking a lot about rules, regulations, standards here today. Do you think that Keir Starmer would do a better job when it comes to rules and regulations, enforcing rules and regulations, making rules and regulations? Would he do a better job?
I don't think so. I think so far his talks are just like broken promises. It's like he tries to convince you that he can change this, he can promise us this, but actually, is he going to make that change? Is it actually going to happen?
Yeah.
The same.
And so, was anyone aware that Keir Starmer was a lawyer? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Does anyone think that might help, being a bit more ruthless when it comes to enforcing the rules or making the rules?
Not necessarily, because you can get a lot of like lawyers that work for big big corporate companies that, you know, help them get more money unethically, really, rather than the good sort of lawyers that you could help everybody else, really. So just because he's a barrister or a lawyer, he just is no different, really, I think. With him personally.
Yeah.
I don't think he's, in terms of policy, he's not really that different to the Tories, to be honest. I mean, he's like, a lot of his election promises of nationalisation of, you know, infrastructure and certain things he's completely gone back on. I don't see much distinction between him and the Tories, really. He's very, very centre left, if, you know, bordering on right, if you ask me. And, you know, he's a Labour leader, but he's back, you know, he's made, you know, losing the whip for his MPs that go on picket lines. It's just like, as a Labour leader, I think that's a bit kind of crazy.
I think one of the issues is that people are very disillusioned about politicians as a whole.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
I'm going to move on a wee bit and ask a couple more questions and test a couple of ideas with you. One of them is about the word. Have you ever heard of the word nanny state?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think we live in a nanny state?
Possibly.
Anyone think we live in a nanny state in the UK? So we've got Linda. No one else thinks we live in a nanny state. The nanny state idea is that basically we've got too many rules or too many regulations, too many standards, that all of this has gone too far. What do you think about that argument? Do you accept it, reject it? What do you think? Chris, you can...
I think there's a lot of truth in it. I think a lot of stuff has gone so far in terms of rules and regulations that it's difficult to keep up. And I know obviously teachers, you know, they're working till 6 each night or later just to try and keep on top of the paperwork, let alone then having to plan lessons the next day and stuff. And businesses as well, they have, you know, auditing standards just increase year on year and year. That just puts so much pressure on auditors that, you know, they're struggling to get anyone in to do the job at the moment, like the juniors, because no one wants to be put under that sort of pressure. Because obviously the fines come back on the auditor and you can get fined, you can get struck off the register. There's a lot of that stuff which puts a lot of pressure on the actual real people doing the jobs.
Yep.
I feel that occasionally there has to be somebody that stands up, and we're so frightened of upsetting, and we need to be like some of the other prime ministers that stand up and say, if you come to this country, you have to have these rules. If you don't like it, don't come to the country. But we try to please everybody and we can't. And sadly, that's, for me, it's like the problem with the refugees, it can take years to sort one case out. Well, we employed all these people for COVID, test and trace. Wouldn't it be better to now employ similar people to deal with the huge problems and get it dealt with once and for all? But it never gets dealt with, anything. Whoever's in power, it seems. Sorry.
No worries. I want to ask you a question, picking up on Chris's point there about rules going too far or regulation going too far. So when it comes to food, for example, or the food that we eat, some people might say that the regulations that we have around food production have gone too far, makes food too expensive. What do you think of that argument? Do you think that food standards are important and, you know, we should be willing to pay a bit more for food that's safe, or actually we've gone too far and the most important thing is that we have cheap food? Where do you come on
I don't know. There's a line, isn't there? You can't. There's no right or wrong. There's no. Yeah, I think we have gone too far in terms of food as well, but safety has to be a priority as well. You have to have food that is consumable. You have to be able to eat it, but they don't have to be perfect round watermelons or apples. They can be misshaped. They can, you know, it doesn't matter. And if we're growing a lot more in the UK, you're not paying all the import duties, etc. And that would be I don't know. I think some of the red tape's in the wrong place, as opposed. Yes, just get rid of it always. Yeah.
Red tape in the wrong place. Okay. Others agree with that. Red tape in the wrong place.
Yeah.
We need red tape in the right places on all the things that we've been talking about. If that's
Yes, I do.
I wanted to test some kind of arguments that people make when talking about rules and regulations here a bit, just as we coming up 10 minutes or so before the end. The first one here is that we pay taxes to the government, and it's reasonable for us to expect them to take care of things, so that what we buy, the products that we buy in shops are safe, the environment around us is protected. We do our bit, they should have our back, is the basic argument. What do you think of that as an argument? Is that something that you agree with? How strongly do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Because we're paying for a service, aren't we, really, from the government?
Say that again.
I suppose we're paying for a service from the government, so we should expect, like you're buying a product from a shop, you expect it to work for what you're told it's supposed to do. Same thing as the government, they say they're going to do these things for us. We pay our taxes, and it should be done.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
And do you think that having the right rules and regulations in the right places is an important way of having your back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's possible for the government to have your back at the minute, or is it that they should have but they don't have?
It's hard to trust they got our back, I suppose, at times with certain things.
Okay. Another argument here is that our children are growing up in a very frightening world at the minute. There's artificial intelligence, maybe AI, these big robot computer things. I don't really understand what they are, but that's what it's called. Online safety and the experience with children online, climate change, the future feels very uncertain. In that context, do you think rules and regulations can help us navigate that, can help us kind of get through that? Or actually, where do you come down on that argument?
I think it's quite frightening for me that we could be run by robots in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I think we do need quite strict rules about it.
And others on that AI point, or robots, as Linda was saying, what do you think the government should be doing on that? Should they be, one argument is that you let them at it and see what happens and hope for the best. And
no, I think it should be strictly controlled. I mean, they do use AI in operations now, don't they? To do minor operations, they use. I know they use AI in some of them, but I don't really know much about it. But
yeah. And anyone disagree that it should be strictly controlled?
I've got 2 young kids, and I don't agree that it's a scary place to grow up and their future's bleak. I think it's exciting because there's loads of possibilities. I do think it does need to be governed, and there needs to be regulations, but there needs to be enough freedom for the companies to grow and experiment things and develop these new technologies which could help in the future. It just needs to be dealt with correctly.
I think there's a lot of doom mongering with AI, isn't there? It's like, I think there's probably a lot of benefits as well to what AI can do in terms of streamlining a lot of what our society struggles with in terms of infrastructure and things. But there's a lot of it's the Matrix, we're all going to be batteries. Not to say that there aren't risks with it, I think, but I think there's a lot of doom mongering going on.
Yep, it's clear. The final argument I want to test, and then we'll have a couple of final questions, is that Britain has been a leader in the past when it comes to rules and regulations. And we should be proud of that. We should be proud of what we've done in the past. but we should aim to keep leading the way, that we need to find our way again in leading the way when it comes to rules and regulations. What do you think of that as a kind of priority for the government? Is that something that you would support? Richard, what do you think about that argument?
Unfortunately, in a lot of ways, I think our time as a country for doing that kind of thing has passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a feeling that realistically, we will be agreeing with an awful lot of the European standards rather than writing our own. Because I don't think we are that kind of country anymore.
Okay. And then one final question before I have the final question is about an idea called the right to disconnect. Has anyone heard of that idea called the right to disconnect?
No.
Sorry, the right what?
So the right to disconnect is a lot of people working online now, hybrid working from home. And so it's the right that some people are proposing that your boss shouldn't be able to contact you outside of work hours. So if you're working from home and you close your laptop or you turn off your notifications or your phone, your boss, you should be legally entitled to say, I'm not responding to those messages during outside work hours. What do people think about that as an idea?
Well, I currently work from home, and I wouldn't entertain being contacted by boss when I was not during working hours.
Okay.
I absolutely agree with that. I have been in the past in a job where I would get a call at 8-9 o'clock and I would quite happily answer it pre-COVID. But I've now got a new job and I wouldn't be happy to answer a call at 9 o'clock anymore.
Okay. Anyone else think that? So do you think in that case, do we need a rule like this, or?
Yeah, I don't
People's
have a
mental
right
health
to
stuff, maybe.
contact
We
you.
do.
What were we saying, Matt? Was that, or that Chris? Matt, who mentioned mental health.
That's me.
Matt, go ahead.
The work pressure that it can put people under to feel like they haven't got time off and they can be contacted by their boss all the time. Sometimes I think that could probably have a lot of pressure on certain people that struggle with anxieties or those sort of problems. And if they're constantly getting bombarded by emails or phone calls or texts, they feel like they're never away to have that downtime. And we're supposed to have, time off work to relax and recover, aren't we? And then we'll be more productive during the working hours. So I had a job that I was getting contacted constantly, and it got to the point where it's just, every time the phone rang, sort of dread filled me up, really, sort of thing, with what's gone wrong now.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, just building on that, some people say that people are aware of health and safety at work or health and safety in the workplace as rules and regulations to keep people safe. And some people make the argument that actually we should be extending the rules about health and safety at work to include mental health as well, so that protecting the mental health of your employees should be part of the Health and Safety at Work Act or the kind of rules and regulations and legislation about health and safety. What do you think of that as an addition, Michelle? What do you think of that as, should we add protecting people's mental health and well-being?
Absolutely. I think it's really important. I think it's a common thing at the moment, post-COVID. And, even working from home isn't actually probably the healthiest kind of environment to be in. I certainly do like to go into the office if I can, but I think it absolutely should be part of it.
Yep. Anyone else agree, disagree on?
I would agree very strongly with Michelle. Ultimately, if your mental health is compromised, you aren't a good employee or a good member of staff anyway. So there is really not much work without the people that do the job. And they need protection.
And you think adding this to the law would help that?
Yeah. Ultimately, health and safety law protects people physically. It should also protect people mentally.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so last question, and then I promise we can go and enjoy sun, hopefully, in Hastings and Hitchin and Harpenden. It is about how important this is, thinking of the next general election, who you're voting for, who you're thinking about voting for. How important are the conversations that we've had tonight around rules and regulations and all of those things, from minimum wage to animal welfare to sewage to all that kind of stuff? How important are rules and regulations basically when it comes to who you're going to vote for? And if you can tell me important, not that important, in your own words, and why. And I'm going to go around the room on this, and then we'll wrap up. So I'll start off with you, Matt.
I think it's important. And I think as long as they can show us that it's going to benefit everybody, the rules and regulations, and then we can trust them to actually do it as well, and not have someone say 6 months into the election, once they've been elected, that they can't actually do it anymore now. So,
yeah. Okay, don't promise. Chris?
Yeah, similar. I think they're important. I think from my point of view, I'd be looking at the smaller laws, which aren't the headline laws, but they're the ones that they're most likely to sort of get through, because they're not as much legislation or piss different sides off, I guess. So I would, they are important.
Small print is important, yeah. Richard?
I think regulations are important, and not just for the protection of people, but the protection of the country, our food, our water, and they shouldn't all be thrown away just so that a lot of people can make a lot of money.
Michelle?
I think it's really important. And I think as long as they make no false promises and they stick to what they kind of tell us they're gonna change or do, then that's great. But yeah, I think it's really important.
Yeah. Rose?
Well, I agree exactly with what Richard said. I couldn't have put it better.
Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, I think rules and regulations are clearly very important. I just, when it comes to election campaigns, I just feel very disillusioned with the actual process of them actually following through and doing what they said they're doing.
Yeah. And Linda, final word.
Yeah, I agree. I think they are very important, and I think what I was talking about, when it comes to the election, I will be asking some of the people on the doorstep some of these questions that have been highlighted, really.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your honesty, for your time, for your openness to discuss a real big range of issues. Hopefully you can go and enjoy the rest of your evening. But once again, thanks very much for your time. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.